There is one consciousness that is the source and substance of everything. There is only one and none other than the one. Now, the thing is that with multiplicity, the objects are so diverse that it seems as if there is a separation. It seems as if nothing is linked as such to any other thing. But consciousness is the one unifying factor, because even the objects that appear in separation get illuminated by that one consciousness. And that consciousness is your true nature. So, in a nutshell, this is all about Advaita teaching. There is nothing actually more to it. But you see, when we live with this sense of separate existence, when we feel that we are different from others, now of course there is a separation in appearance, but that separation comes about, it comes because of this mind, this limited mind, which distorts the vision. But the very ability to perceive comes from that consciousness. All your senses get illuminated by the consciousness. In fact, whatever sensory input we get, it is our mind that processes, makes sense of that based on conditioning. And that working of the mind is facilitated by the consciousness. But when we live with the sense of separation, when we live thinking that we are separate from others, in other words, when we forget our true nature, which is consciousness, difficulties in interpersonal relationships comes about. Because I believe that I am separate from you, and then I stick to my beliefs. And if your beliefs, if they are opposing to mine, then there is a friction. Because every perceiving mind, the limited mind, thinks that it is right and the other is wrong. And this whole duality of right and wrong creates confusion. That is why spiritual teacher Joel Goldsmith says that give up in the two powers of right and wrong. And even other mystics like Rumi have also said that when you give up in these two powers of what is right and what is wrong, that is when you lie down on the grass and you rest. But till I am identified with a certain group of ideas which are brought about and strengthened by my own mind, I remain attached. And this attachment, this clinging, brings suffering. So, what happens is that when I am attached, it is but natural that I am in pain, because attachment brings about jealousy, resentment, even hatred. So the mind thinks in the opposite and it says, no, I should be detached. That is how the mind finds solution to a problem. Let me avoid the other. Let me just run away from the other. Mind is not ever ready to see things the way they are. The mind wants its own version of reality. And it does everything to conform to what it has already preconceived. So there is a constant struggle. There is this constant fight going on. A majority of us are fighting our own mind. The war is not outside, the war is happening within us, in our own minds. But when the mind understands that this whole dualistic split of right and wrong is not the truth, but consciousness alone is the truth which powers everything, then something fantastic happens. Then something wonderful, something beautiful happens. There is a surrender. It is not the surrender of the mind per se, but there is a sense of surrender which comes about. After which the mind stops movement in doership. So now, even if I have challenges with the other person, if I have a conflict in my relationship with the other, I do not lose my cool. I allow others to be the way they are, and I allow myself to be the way I am. I may not agree with people, but at the same time, I do not create any hate or malice towards them. I do not create any resentment towards them. I accept them for who they are because I have accepted myself for who I am. And that is what love is all about. Now, sometimes a reaction happens. Generally, I get this question that a lot of people say that I'm very reactive and I don't want to react. And I say to them is that what you think is your reaction is actually the response of the biological organism. Now, what happens in the moment is that, let's say somebody says something and you react to it. Now, in the moment, nobody has any control of what happens next. In the next moment, I do not know if a loving thought or a scary thought will appear. But when I have understood the nature of thought and thinking, I accept both. But even after acceptance, a reaction still may come about. I may still get upset with the other and tell them that they did something which I did not like. Now, that is the reaction of the biological organism. That is how the organism is designed. But what happens is that the ego comes up afterwards with the dialogues that why did you say such a thing? You are a horrible person. You should have controlled yourself. Don't you have any control over your emotions? You know, all these dialogues we keep repeating in our mind over and over again, endlessly. So this is a never-ending thing that we are caught up in. Now, of course, if you've said something hurtful to another person and you feel regret for that, you realize that you had a reaction, you can apologize to the person. And that apology is to free oneself and the other person from the bond of resentment. It is not that the conflict may resolve. It is not done to resolve the conflict, because resolving the conflict is not in your control. All you can do from your end is tell them that you did not mean it and that you're sorry for what happened. But you do not blame the other person, you do not condemn the other person, and at the same time, you do not create any guilt and shame either for yourself or the other person. So, that is how the recognition of consciousness, that is how the invocation of reality frees, frees us in our relationships. We still may have disharmony in relationships, we still may have ups and downs in relationship, but we don't get caught up in that story, because we remain rooted in the reality of the moment. So we accept that as human beings, sometimes we may have reactions, because the biological organism is defined in such a way, is designed in such a way that reactions are supposed to happen. There is no way you can make your body reaction proof. There is no practice, no meditation on the planet which can make you reaction proof. Yes, the frequency of your reactions will definitely reduce with practices. The frequency of your emotions, turbulent emotions like anger, rage, that may begin to reduce with practices. But it will never be the case that you never react. But at the same time, you understand that the reaction was not yours per se. The reaction came about because of certain conditions, certain forces that you were subjected to. See, when you are in a happy environment, happy mood, say you are on a vacation on an island, or you are attending a meditation retreat, in that case, you are generally happy. So, if somebody says something, you would disregard it and probably control that reaction of yours. You may feel anger, some spike of anger in the moment, but you will let it go easily. But let's say when you are in a difficult situation, let's say maybe you are going through some sort of a grieving period where you may have lost a loved one, or where you're going through a financial challenge or a divorce or any such thing. In that moment, when somebody says something, then a reaction can happen. There are too many forces acting on us, and it is very difficult sometimes. Now, even Ramana Maharishi used to have reactions, like he would be upset when the toilets of the ashram were not clean. But of course, his way of expressing was very different. Like he would not shout and rage at people. And of course, that is Ramana Maharishi we are talking about. So we cannot compare ourselves with him. But even Ramana in human form had reaction. And many people asked Ramesh Balsekar that did Ramana Maharishi was Ramana Maharishi free of ego? And to which Ramesh Balsekar said that Ramana Maharishi definitely had an ego, but he was free of the ego. Which means that when somebody called out Ramana by his name, he would turn and look. For that matter, everybody, when they are called by their name, they would turn and look. So that says that the identification with the name and form per se is not the problem. The problem is the sense of doership, where one believes that they are the doers of their action. That is where the real problem is. Because when we believe we are the doers, then we judge ourselves for wrong actions, or we create pride and arrogance for what we perceive as right actions. And both these scenarios are troubling because both of these perpetuate the sense of separate existence or the ego. When I am successful or when I do a good deed and I create excessive pride for myself, saying that, look, I did this. When I claim ownership, when I claim that I am the doer, when I say claiming ownership or doership, that means concerned with the outcome. That means I am doing things bearing in mind that there is a particular outcome I want. So let's say if I am doing something for the other, I want to be liked. That is why I am constantly, all my actions are geared with that, identified with that movement. I want to be liked, so I must do this, do that. But when they do not reciprocate in the same way, then I create anger. Then I create anger for them, and also I create shame for myself. That is why the sense of doership is painful, because most people do not understand how doership poisons. Doership is complete identification with the outcome. I want the outcome to be a certain way. And if it is not the way I imagine it, then I am unhappy. That is the recipe. Doership is the recipe for a painful life. But when I recognize the futility of doership, that recognition itself dissolves, it begins to dissolve the doership. The acceptance of situation the way it is weakens the ego. It is a slow process, and life itself teaches us. There is no practice, no method, there is nothing we can do to weaken the doership other than to simply observe the movement of mind, the movement of the ego mind. That how covertly it is working to achieve what it wants. In silence, everything is revealed. All the subtle movements of the mind are revealed in silence. Silence is the witness. And witness is simply being. That is why in the scriptures they say your true nature is Sat Chit Ananda. Being, consciousness, bliss. They are not three. Being is consciousness and consciousness is bliss. But it is not the worldly bliss that we imagine. It is not the bliss that you get after drinking a glass of wine. That bliss is your very natural state It is the most ordinary thing, yet it is the most extraordinary. And the only way to experience that is to become the experience. So Ramana Maharishi would say, your job is not to be this or that. Your job is simply to be. And another understanding that weakens the ego is that everything is God's will, which comes in the quote from Bible, thy will be done. When everything is God's will, then there is no concern with personal doership. Then the personal doership automatically dissolves, because thy will be done is complete acceptance. Now, it is not to say that this will protect us from the pain and misery of life. Nisargadatta Maharaj very clearly said that the flow of life is alternating between pain and pleasure, where the moments of pain are greater than the moments of pleasure. That is why this life is like a simple imprisonment. But with our doership, with our incessant thinking, worrying, stressing, we make this simple imprisonment into a rigorous imprisonment. The mind makes it more challenging than it has to be. So, Advaita in a nutshell is surrendering to what is, whatever is arising. And whatever is arising is here and now. This which illumines everything is free of space, time, and causation. It is eternal in nature. It was never born, it never dies. It is Adi, it is Anadi, beginningless, endless. And one of the greatest pointer from Ramana Maharishi was Summairu, drop and be. Just in this moment, drop and simply be. So, in being, there won't even be a question as to who you are or what your purpose is, what is life all about. All these questions begin to fade away, because these questions lose meaning. All these questions come from the sense of personal identification, they are rooted in the ego. And the nature of ego is suffering, pain and suffering. So the ego, in the bid to avoid suffering, creates these questions. Who am I? Where am I? What am I? What is this life all about? What is the purpose? Every movement of ego is not to destroy itself, it is to perpetuate itself. But it gives the illusion as if it is seeking something to attain bliss or enlightenment or anything of that nature. But the ego is not interested in any of that. Ego is simply interested in its own continuation. Therefore, when everything fails, when all teachings fail, when all spirituality fails, come back to this, to the being. Come back to here and now. because this is your refuge, this is your place of rest, and this is available all the time because this is free of time. This is what illumines the time. And your true nature is this being, this consciousness.